Today, I'm going to be answering a few personal questions that you've asked me, and at the end, I really want to talk about what's happening with the big four pattern companies and what that might mean for the sewing community. Hi, my name is Sarah. If you're new here, I make videos about sewing and styling a handmade wardrobe. This is part of a series where I answer your questions. I have a thread in my community tab that I will put in a pinned comment in this video where you can ask me any questions that you like, and I will answer them in a video just like this one. So let's just get to the first question. First up, we have a question from Sew Yourself a Capsule Wardrobe. My question is, how on earth do you find the time to make such beautiful and intricate garments, film and edit YouTube videos, and work as well? Love your channel, by the way. Thank you so much for your question. So the very short answer to this question is that I don't. If you've been here for a while, then you'll know that a few years ago, I was much more prolific with my sewing and crafting. I made probably at least 5 garments a month and have slowed way down from that to the point where I now finish maybe between 1 and 3 new things a month. Now, to be fair, a lot of that is intentional. I realized that in the past, making around 5 new things a month meant that I ended up with 60 new things a year, which is basically like a whole new wardrobe. And for me, that was just not sustainable. I don't want to be in the cycle of constantly making new things and getting rid of old things. I want to make things that I love that are going to last for a long time. So that pretty much made it a necessity that I needed to slow down. So some ways that have assisted in my slowing down on my sewing have been making things that are maybe a little bit more challenging, although I don't think that I really make anything that's too difficult. But maybe just not churning out tons and tons of t-shirts and like really simple projects. And I've also taken a lot more time with the fitting and trying to get that right. That does take more time, which means that I make fewer things. But also, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things, I just don't have the time anymore to devote to sewing the way that I used to. When I was working from home completely during the pandemic, I just had a lot more time to sew that I don't really have anymore. So that's really a big part of why my production has decreased as well. The other part of this, which I feel is probably the biggest part of the equation for why I have time to work and have a YouTube channel and make things, is because I don't have children. I have a husband and I have a very needy dog, but I don't have kids. And so not having kids, I actually don't really know if this is true, but my understanding of it is that it takes a great deal of time when you have children. And regardless of their ages, whether they're younger or older, that's going to take up a lot of your time. So that is just one element of life that is not a factor for me. So I'm sure that that contributes multitudes to my having more free time than some other people. So I hope that that answers your question, and thank you so much for asking. The second question is from Myra Lorraine. Hi, Myra. Myra is one of my good friends here on YouTube, and I will link her channel down in the description box. Myra asks, all of us sewists have our reasons for why we choose the platforms we post to. Can you tell me why you originally started recording on YouTube, and has it changed since you first started? So fun fact, I actually started a YouTube channel back in 2015. At the time, I was mostly obsessed with knitting, and I watched a lot of knitting podcasts, and it just inspired me to start my own because it was kind of the era where I stopped blogging as much. Everything was kind of moving from blogs over to video. And I really wanted a forum where I could share the things that I was working on with others because Instagram just was not very satisfying for that. It's just hard to write a really long caption on Instagram and interact with other people. So I thought that YouTube would be a good way to share my projects with others. So I did have my knitting YouTube channel for a couple of years, and then for various reasons, I gave it up and just took a long break. And I did not come back to YouTube until 2021 when I had gotten back into sewing more. And this time around, I think my first video was about the first Sew Frugal challenge. I wanted to share the dress that I had made for that, and it was kind of complicated. So I didn't feel like I could just briefly explain what I had done in an Instagram post. So again, I thought of YouTube. So I restarted my YouTube channel and I was talking about sewing more this time, and I haven't looked back. Now, as far as things changing, I do feel like YouTube has changed quite a lot in the past few years. For one thing, I sort of feel like that the pandemic was sort of peak YouTube. Like I just feel like people probably had more time on their hands. So a lot of people had started up YouTube channels, and now we've maybe moved away from that and people just don't seem to have as much time anymore. So at least it feels like a lot of my favorite channels have given up and they're not producing anymore. Let me know in the comments if you agree. It just feels like we've lost a lot of really good YouTubers recently. I also just feel like we're past peak YouTube and that it's going to get harder and harder for new people to come in and find an audience. There's just so many different channels out there. And at least for me personally, I feel like it's getting harder and harder to break through. Like if you want to have success these days, I feel like you basically have to bow to the algorithm. and make videos that are maybe a little bit more sensational, or just doing the kinds of content that I don't really want to do. Like the whole point of my YouTube channel was I just wanted to share the things that I was making and a little bit about my life. I'm just not going to drop everything and turn into one of those channels where, I churn out an entire wardrobe in 1 week, or sew 7 dresses in 1 day, or just make those kind of clickbaity videos that I'm just not interested in doing that. But because it seems like that is what people respond to these days, I think it's becoming harder and harder to have success. That's just my opinion, and I'm not an expert, so I could totally be wrong about that. But for me, I am happy to have my relatively small audience that enjoys the things that I make and that keeps coming back. So I do appreciate each and every one of you. And you guys are the ones that keep me going. So the next question is from Sewing Obsessed. This is quite a long comment, so I'm going to kind of skip ahead a little bit. My question is about books, and I think that your view that a book is better if it leaves a lasting impression on you. I wonder if you would consider the benefits of a good story, characters, enjoying the read at the time, and then the joy of discovering it again years later. This happens to me often, particularly with audiobooks, and I really like that I can enjoy it again without remembering what happens. I think this is a really interesting perspective, and I would like to do that. But I guess for me, like there's just so many books out there that I feel like I'm never going to get to read all of the books that I want to read before I die. And so therefore, I feel like I don't have time to go back and reread things that I've already read in the past. Now, that's not always true. I do have my favorites that I will go back and read again, but it's really rare. In a minute, I'm just going to share with you some of the books that I've read recently that I really loved. But I read this book recently by Lauren Groff, and it reminded me of another book from her that I read a few years ago. It was called Fates and Furies, and all I remember about that book is that I didn't like it, but I can't remember any of the plot details. I just remember like the title, like, oh yeah, I read that and I didn't like it. And basically when I read her more recent book, I really liked that book, and it kind of made me think like, hey, maybe I should go back and reread Fates and Furies and maybe see if I feel differently this time than I did the first time around. But then my second thought right after that was, I don't have time to do that. I have too many other books to read. So it is something that I think about and I do consider, and maybe I will go back and read that book at some point. But for now, that's sort of my general attitude, is I would love to be able to do that, but I just have so many other books that I want to read that it's just not on my priority list at the moment. Now, I know that not all of you are interested in books, but I know that some people do love it. And so I'm not going to tell you every single book that I've read since the last time I told you, because there have been quite a few, but I just wanted to hit a few of the highlights of things I particularly enjoyed, and I wanted to share them with you. So the first book is The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff that I was just talking about. It's been a while since I've read it, and so I apologize if I get some of the details wrong, but basically it's about a young girl in colonial America that she's running away from a crime that's been committed, and she's trying to survive out in the wilderness by herself. And I was just blown away by the quality of the writing of this book. Like, I just thought that the language in it was beautiful. It was just so wonderfully written. That's kind of what made me want to go back to Fates and Furies and reread that one and see if I feel differently about it. Because this book, it just felt like Lauren is a master of her craft, and I was just admiring it as a work of art. The only nitpick that I had about this book was that maybe it was a little bit too much of a modern viewpoint of women in society, and people didn't necessarily really think that way back then, but that was a very small little thing. And overall, the quality of the writing was just so good that I really enjoyed reading this book, and I would highly recommend it to others. Another book that I really loved is The House of My Mother by Sherry Frankie. This is a true story written by the daughter of Ruby Frankie, who was a Mormon influencer who abused her children, and it was a horrifying story. It was in the news. And this book was just very emotional for me. And I was just really inspired by someone so young who had endured these terrible things happening to her, that she still has hope for the future, and she still believes in healing and forgiveness. And it was just a really upsetting story, but also very uplifting, that such a young person can work through this horrible abuse and still have a hopeful outlook on life. So I wouldn't recommend this book for everyone. It's a pretty difficult book to read, but I do think that it was worth it. And I sometimes have a hard time believing in humanity because there's so many terrible things out there. But it's people like this young woman that make me think that maybe we're going to be okay in the end. The next book that I really loved was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I first read another book by Susanna Clarke, which I liked but didn't love, so I won't share that with you. But that made me want to read some of her other books, so I went back and read this one, which I think was maybe her first big novel. I was just completely blown away by this one. It is really long, so I do want to say that up front. If you're not into reading a very long story, then maybe skip this one. But I just really loved every minute of reading it. It's a fantasy story set back in the past, and it's about these two magicians, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, who are trying to bring magic back to England. And it's just a really great fantasy story. I found out that they made a mini series of this book, and so I really, really want to watch that, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But I absolutely loved the book, and if I had time, I would 100% go back and read that one again because I very much enjoyed it. And then the final book that I want to share is the most recent one that I read. It's called The Indifferent Stars Above by Daniel James Brown. This one was about the Donner Party, and it's a little bit similar to the Sherry Frankie book in that it really puts you in the shoes of these people going through this horrible ordeal and how they managed to survive. It's of course a totally different approach because Sherry's is a first-person account, and this story is someone writing about something that happened in the distant past. But the details of the book, it was really well researched, and I felt like I was really put into the shoes of the people on the frontier going on this disaster journey, and it was just a really good book that also left me with a little bit of hope at the end, even though it was such a tragic story. I thought that the book was both informative and emotional, and it was written really well, so if you haven't checked that out and you're interested in history, I think that that was a really good read. So the last thing I want to talk about was not a question that someone else asked me, but it's a question that I have for you guys. So I want to talk a little bit about the recent news that the Big Four pattern company has been sold to a liquidator. So I'm not a business person, so I do not pretend to understand the details of this, but my understanding is that this is not good news. Like, we don't know what's going to happen yet. Someone else could come in and purchase them, or they could break them up and sell them off in pieces, or they could just go away entirely. But I think there's a decent chance that there are definitely changes coming to the Big Four and that we might not see all of them around in the future. So just right off the bat, I'm really sad about this. The Big Four, Simplicity, Butterick, McCall's, and Vogue, a lot of them have been around for over 100 years, and so it would be like losing a little bit of history if they go away, and that makes me feel really sad. Because although it's basically sort of a niche business now, at one time these companies were a big deal. This was how a lot of people clothed themselves. They bought the patterns and then made the garments themselves. And to lose that little bit of history just makes me feel really sad. I also feel like this is just my personal opinion that the Big Four/Big Five companies have really gotten a bad rep for probably about 15, 20 years now. That you constantly hear people say like, oh, they're not for beginners, they're so hard to understand. And I don't necessarily think that that's really fair. Now, if you have never sewn anything in your entire life before, then I agree, starting out with a Big Four pattern is maybe not the best bet. However, I feel like we're forgetting that traditionally the way that people learned to sew when they used these patterns is that they had teachers. Like my mom, when she learned to sew, she learned in school and she had an instructor. And so I almost feel like the tradition of the company was not that the pattern was meant to be a standalone teaching tool by itself. It was supposed to be an implement that you use to make a garment, but you have someone there to help you and show you how to do the steps. So it's really not meant to be a beginner tool just by itself without any other assistance. I think that that's a really big shift in how patterns are viewed today, because now we expect them to have video tutorials and explain every little thing and the definition of what all the different terms mean. And it's just a lot. I think that we're asking a lot from our pattern companies. So I would love to hear you guys' thoughts about what you think about the Big Four potentially going away. I guess personally, it's one of those times where being a hoarder is going to pay off. Like, I have quite a substantial pattern stash. If they do go away and I can never buy patterns from them again, I'd have plenty to keep me busy for the rest of my life. And I'm also curious to see how this might affect the secondary pattern market. If they're not producing new ones, what's going to happen with the old ones? So yeah, there's just a lot of thoughts chasing around in my brain about this news, and I would love to hear what you think. So thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any questions for me, don't forget to check out the pinned comment where you can leave your questions in the questions thread. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.